Court of Cainhurst 2. Berengar stood on the Yhorm rooftops with a silvery metal helmet under his arm. He breathed the air, sucked it in and felt pride as he looked over the sleeping town in the night. He donned his helmet, that completely obscured his face, with ornamental ashen hair falling out from underneath it at the back. He leapt down onto a balcony where he crept up behind the curtains to peek inside. It was lit inside, and through a door came a woman into the bedroom, not having seen him. He thought she was beautiful and considered taking her for himself. His queen would surely not need her. After her came a man, a lovely pair, and definitely a prime fit. He was tall and handsome. So handsome, in fact, that it was perhaps even worth the strain to let the queen see him for herself. However, his considerations were interrupted by the sounds of footsteps from the street below. An appealing sound on the night of a hunt. The firm pace of a hunter's boots. Peering over the railing, he saw 4 hunters walking below, illuminated by lanterns. What luck, he thought. A hunter was sure to have the most exquisite dregs, strong and hardy. What more could one hope for than a firm slayer of beasts? He leapt up and plunged downwards, making no sound as he landed. Standing up behind them, still unseen to them, he drew his shikage loudly, which caused them to turn. Like most, they were astonished and locked in their stances upon first seeing him, but adapted quickly when he charged at them. A sword was drawn to clash against his own. He was a strong hunter indeed, but when Berengar pushed further with his blade, the hunter's posture began to crumple, and he scoffed from beneath the helmet. The hunter attempted to spin to the side, but was far too sluggish in Berengar's point of view, and before he was able to retaliate, he had cut him straight over the chest. 2 other hunters had barely managed to flank him before he leapt away with an unmatched speed to avoid the blood from the falling hunter. The second one was much faster, and when the saw cleaver came down at him, he heard the grunt of a woman, which would not do at all. He stepped beside her and towards the other that had just retrieved his kirkhammer. A strong one, it would appear. When the massive hammerhead came down at him, he grazed it with the palm of his hand and pushed himself beside it, slightly redirecting the swing, but noticing that it indeed were of appropriate metal. He was his favorite thus far. He spun around right beside the man towards the last one, who struck at him with a broadsword. He parried it with his own blade and felt a bit of anxiety. The man was also very strong and wielded a weapon he personally had more preference for over a brutish hammer. Which to choose? He leapt backwards deliberately to where the woman stood and turned around to bring her closer by swiping at her, then stepping away. She was not fooled, however, and the hammer of the second hunter swept at his legs but he simply stepped upon the massive chunk and leapt over the man wielding it. He had decided. Preferably a man with a bit more wit. He vaulted over him so the top of both their heads almost touched, spun around in the air and cut straight down along the back before he landed. Strength does not amount to much if you become slow by it, in Berenger's opinion. The blood from the man that would have splattered over himself was instead gathered alongside the engraved blade, making it double in size. He kicked the body over and leapt forward in a bloody dash and swiped like the lightning at the woman. Perhaps she was a contender after all, despite being a woman, for her speed matched his own. It could almost make him laugh in the light, but she had yet seen nothing. He spun around to avoid the pick the man behind him brought down at him, cutting broadly with the blade to dispense the blood in a forceful wave that pushed them both back. He then sheathed the blade to take the most precious of blood onto it, his own. It was as if a fire had lit up inside the sheath, and the lightning emerged with a bloody, roaring blade. He cut one straight down that created a delayed wave of crimson inferno that traced the blow in the air. He lunged at the two of them, cutting and creating lines like he was drawing with fiery paint that erupted after the path of his unsightly quick strikes. He broke straight through the woman's cleaver, and in doing so caused her entire chest to become ravaged by the lingering force. The man remained quick on his feet and dodged in between the lines as they erupted with fire. The whole street lit up, a stage that heralded the most precious of bounties. The hunter jumped to the side, and Berenger spun with the flow of his blade, cutting behind him and leaping into the air, flipping to land a few feet away, where he aimed the tip of the blade at the hunter. The man was heaving, and he flung the blunderbuss from his side up at him. Berenger dodged the salvo, and by stepping onto the wall of the house, he pushed himself towards the hunter with the same speed of the projectiles recently fired at him. The sword pierced his chest, the heart specifically. He let the pouring blood stain the silvery plating of his armor. This was quality blood, after all. Then he let the hunter fall onto his back. He tilted his head downward at his fallen opponent. It had been a good sport, and the yield would surely be a prime specimen. He hovered with the tip of the blade at the open wound where the blood still emerged. A small amount eventually separated itself and crawled up along the engravings. It shimmered in the moonlight and moved as if alive. Alive with plenty of vigor. He smiled in delight. He kneeled before the throne, eyes down to the floor. The queen's eyes gazing with burning fervor at him. Would he look up, he would meet them. But he contained himself.
Ah, beloved knight.
Her delicate, blissful voice spoke to him.
Valiant defender of the Cainhurst crown. gaze upon us.
He did so, to just behold Her Majesty's face, nothing short of a goddess. She sat relaxed, leaning on one armrest in the grand throne, pale eyes glaring at him with the radiance of the stars in the night-filled hall. Beside her sat His Majesty, admittedly in a saddened state, a living husk, a cadaver of a man dressed in the royal robes, swathed in a red mantle and still donned with a kingly crown, but inanimate, as if deceased.
Emissary, facilitator of our exalted communion.
She leaned slightly forward and stretched out her upturned hand.
Give it unto us.
He unsheathed his sword and reached with the tip of the blade towards Her Majesty. Her fingers grazed it, then slowly and composedly pushed her wrist against the tip. The blood dregs he had taken squirmed their way along the engravings and into her body. She emitted a pleasurable groan, unfit for royalty, that made him almost lose his composure. Who could blame such a true-born queen for the consequences of the rapture it brought?
Yes, it grows, writhes. Berenger, dost thou yet yearn for the coming heir?
He bowed his head lower.
Then earn the fruit of thy efforts. We bid thee partake once more of his essence.
It was unbearable to maintain his manners, yet he successfully retained his composure. She withdrew the hand as the wound closed, then extended the other to him.
Partake, O blood-bound knight. Praise be the coming of our heir.
He gently took hold of her hand and bit down at her wrist and sucked up the life essence. He quickly lost his senses to the ecstasy, and he gruntingly licked and ravaged her pale, delicate wrist to gain as much of it as he could, like it was air to him. All to the chuckling delight of the Queen of Cainhurst. Fiachra awakened in the dream. He shot up as if life had been a nightmare. He was damp with sweat, and his breath was momentarily uncontrollable. He even provoked the doll to hasten her composed walk down the workshop ascent, to hurry over to him, laying a hand on his back.
Good hunter, whatever is the matter?
He fumbled with the latch and threw off his beaked mask. It was with a smile that he turned to look at the doll. she did not acknowledge it.
I just...
Had it been anyone but a doll, he anticipated they would think him mad. But he did not care. The ecstasy his battle to the death had caused him was something one could never even feel in a dream. He laughed until he grew calm, and he stretched out his legs where he sat on the stone path.
What a hunt. What a hunt indeed.
The doll stood back up and looked curiously, but expressionlessly, down at him.
I tell you, that man, that was life.
Sounds like you tasted life out there. Kerman would be proud.
No.
The invocation of the master's name made him look around. He was a bit disappointed in not seeing him there, but perhaps it was for the best.
No, he would not be proud.
Oh no, how is that? You surely don't want to be stuck in a dream forever.
But I don't want to be stuck in the hunt either. And I can't do that anymore. I'm not as... the blood surely courses my veins by now. Don't you think?
Have no fear. It is but echoes.
Yeah. But this blood.
He raised his hands and looked upon them. The blood previously staining them was now gone.
His speed, his strength. Oh, what blood must course his veins.
A beast?
No. A man. Plain and simple. A man like no other. The blood, you see, it was his weapon. It flew over his blade, bit after me like 100 snakes until its venom had corrupted me to the core. That was... it was corrupted blood. Vile blood.
He stood and looked into the manufactured eyes of a doll.
It has been a pleasure.
He reached out a hand that she looked curiously at. He smirked with amusement when he saw her white eyebrows sinking in confusion, and she felt very human to him then. Eventually she reached out her own hand, holding it with the palm downward, like she was about to commence the bestowing ritual of echoes. He grabbed it and shook it, smiling even brighter when he caught a sight of clear surprise on her face, glad to finally have seen a prominent emotion from her.
You are a good one. Don't let anyone treat you wrong, despite being a doll.
She drew her breath and looked straight at him, as if the fact had escaped her, but ended up saying nothing.
Now, I need to find German. I have a favor to ask.
Kristoff was primarily looking at the ornate vial of blood on the table. At the short end of said table sat his accomplice, who was mostly there for appearances. He too mostly looking at the blood. There really was nothing special about it, far as sight was concerned. Red, murky. Perhaps it was a bit darker than ordinary, but it could simply be the lighting of the windowless chamber. His accomplice shuffled in his seat, straightening himself from looking awfully tired. I don't recall seeing Logarius in the research hall, he said like he was talking to himself. Kristoff just mumbled out of acknowledgement. I mean to say, would you be able to tell? He shrugged. He has the documents to consult, if he wishes. True that. I was just... Oh, never mind. It tastes Logarius, after all. Very true. He adjusted himself where he sat, leaning his head against his fist, while Kristoff folded his hands over his chest, slumping further into the chair. What do you think they are doing? What? To get their blood like that, or just their gold? The man shook his head mildly, eyes still on the flask. I hadn't really considered there to be a goal. There should be. You don't uphold such nocturnal antics without a high degree of planning. That's true. I fully understand why the church doesn't want this out there. In the public. Kristoff turned to him drowsily. What? That they have special blood of their own. Yes, no, indeed. True said. They returned, looking at the vial. In short, there came footsteps from beyond the door across the table. Several people stopped outside. A moment's silence. Then the door opened slowly, and Master Logarius stepped inside like a hovering spectre. Good evening, Master. He cleared his throat and nodded, approaching ominously. An urgent matter? What could possibly be so urgent for today's whippersnappers? He had evidently decided long ago that he was losing patience with them, judging by his tone. Apologies, Master Logarius. It regards your inquiry of the delinquent you apprehended. The Canehurst delinquent? Pardon you? At last. I do certainly not appreciate the duration with which such a threatening case was dealt with. Sorry. Again, sir.
No more. It is about time the church took such animosity with the severity it is due.
His tone actually made Kristoff feel physically smaller in his seat, while the tall old man appeared to grow where he stood.
Now there is one thing I wish to hear to determine if this encounter is worthwhile.
Sorry, Master Lugarius. The church has acknowledged your request for action. This is the reason why it's necessary. He stood and motioned to the flask. Lugarius peered down at it, but quickly pierced him with his gaze once more, like he had not seen it. This is Cana's blood. From the individual you apprehended.
What of it?
It has similar effects to the holy blood, sir. My accomplice here has...
Heresy!
The entire presence of his voice was grander than what the room allowed, and could alone send Kristoff straight back down into his chair.
Nothing but heresy. What form of vile blood must it be?
We have no good conclusions, sir. It must be some sort of modification. It is certainly not a holy blood as we know it. Again, the details are here. Keeping his eyes eerily focused on him, he hunched down to snatch up the vial of blood and held it aloft.
'Tis clearly poisonous. No holy essence could pass as this taint. By the gods, it is worse than we anticipated. You see now the punishment of underestimating the wicked. They concoct grotesque brews like this. Then they languish in the sin of crimson. Oh, I told you all. I told you!
He flung the vial straight into the open fireplace. It crashed into the wall behind the fire and completely doused it, strangely enough. In a room where smoke trailed up into the ceiling and only lit by candles, Lugarius' bearded face was lit from below, obscuring his eyes as he stood like a statue.
Now then, clerics of the church, I presume you won't stand in the way of God's punishment.
Sir, we are indeed concerned, and considering your past experience with dealing with the King's Knights, we do turn for your counsel. It was as if he had frozen. Kristoff glanced over at the other man, who sat tense in his seat, gripping hard around the armrests.
God's punishment for conducting such.
He breathed in loudly, as if a sudden chest pain had overcome him.
Sacrilege! I am the one to assume the radiant mantle of executioner.
In the murky room, enveloped by flickering shadows, his appearance was more horrifying due to how quick he moved. In the blink of an eye had he turned around, and within the next second vanished out through the door, slamming it shut behind him. The two looked at it for a moment, before looking at each other. He didn't even read it. No, he didn't. The hags peering out from their decrepit abodes. The feeble men with honest hatred in their eyes. All sickened him. Eaforth marched not far behind Master Logarius himself as they travelled through the settlement of Hemwick. All with their heavy Punisher wheels carried on their backs. Now all the people watched them pass, doing nothing. How despicable that their loyalty would falter so easily. Some of his peers may have taken pride in the terror they induced, but he only felt his hatred further growing. There was always a choice to be made for any man and woman, and here he saw them making their choice, and it sickened him. Logarius stopped for a moment before stepping on the massive bridge leading out over the water. Beyond, on an island, stood the harrowing Cainhurst castle. He breathed in the night air deeply. Those in the front started putting on their coned golden Ardeo helmets. Eaforth himself put on the helmet and watched the army behind him do the same.
Our spirit shines bright, our resolve radiant.
Logarius drew his glistening sword with a golden line running in the middle of the waved blade.
The goodness of man conjures light to cast away evil darkness of vile fiends.
A nightly breeze blew at them from the water. A bell rang out from the castle, which resonated amongst them. It excited him, playing on his rage, which was furthered by the heavy breathing and grunting of his fellows. Like stepping out from shadows, simply appearing ahead of them on the bridge, came one of the freakish Vilebloods. Armor of silver and holding a faintly curved blade out to his side. The sight angered them all, erupting in roars of fury, and they set off towards their enemy, passing Master Logarius, who remained in place. The figure continued stepping calmly towards them, as another appeared similarly ethereally behind him. Suddenly the man beside him had silenced his hollering and fallen down. Eaforth stopped to see how his headless body fell onto the stone brick ground, with the head rolling out of the golden helmet. A sinister, dark character standing right beside the body. From all sides the accursed spectres lunged up from beyond the bridge, like carried up by the wind itself. Vilebloods assaulted them, carrying silvery helmets with artistic patterns over the face, and equally finely crafted armors of metal plating that must have been incredibly lightweight for them to move like they did. Eaforth slung the wheel over his shoulder and swung it towards the man, who stepped to the side as it crashed into the ground. Several of his companions ran further out and ahead of him on the bridge, as he swung his wheel again after the Vileblood. He leapt up into the air and kicked him over the head, causing him to fall. But just as he hit the ground, two of his companions came up behind the Vileblood with their wheels and shoved him over, while yet another came from the other side with an arcing swing straight down onto the man's chest. Under the screams of his radiant peers, he glimpsed, while rolling on the ground, how the outnumbered Vilebloods cleaved with their swords at them, with massive waves of blood tracing their strikes. It was hard to tell if the massive amounts of blood was a product of the wounds they sustained, or if it was the blood itself that cleaved into the executioners like massive blades. Astonishingly, upon lifting the wheel up from him, the man rolled aside and stood back up, his chest visibly contorted and his posture hunched. He spun around, and on the return swing, the blade sent a wave of blood towards the man that had harmed him. The force was unfathomable from what just appeared as forcibly thrown liquid, but all the same, it sent two of his attackers straight over the edge of the railing into the water below. The fiend stumbled and once again was beset by the executioner's wheel. This time they continued to bash into his body until it could not possibly move. More of the blue-robed men swarmed the bridge, feverishly raging and hollering either in clear roars or incoherent shouting. As he stood, now with 10 or so men in front of him, he saw blood fly into the air ahead of them, as even more executioners rushed past him. He joined them and crowded towards the front, eager for purging the filth, the nightmare, the scourge upon the world. That such abhorrent manifestation of man ought only be exterminated was so pleasantly clear that he became obsessively eager to get to it, to vanquish it and let his spirit shine with glorious purpose. More had joined the numbers of the Vilebloods, not wearing the same armor, but black and red attires, wielding elegant piercing swords. He roared with his companions, reinforcing his spirit and giving him strength to brandish his executioner's wheel. Shimmering light exploded from the swords pointed at him. A bullet hit the man next to him, silencing the shout in a surprised groan before he crumpled to the ground. One of the dark Vilebloods flew out at them from the host of defenders. Panicked, he raised his wheel to try and stop the terrifying attacker. Two other men charged forward, which the assailant collided with, severing one of their heads, and was subsequently shoved away by the other man. Eoforth prepared to swing the wheel over his head, but the knight stepped back, spun around and cut downward, severing the other man's lower arm that held onto the wheel. He kicked the body back and turned to him. He struck forward, swinging it diagonally up at him, but Eoforth swung his wheel down to clash with the blade. This caused the Vileblood to spin around and duck down to kick the legs out from under him. He landed on his stomach and could only think of crawling forward, past more of the radiant warriors, charging further on the bridge. A boot kicked off his helmet and he tumbled onto his back, which led him to further roll out of the way of all the assaulting men until he hit the bridge's railing. He saw the backs of the blue-mantled warrior meet the blades of the Vilebloods in a collision of force straight out of warfare legends. Voices screaming, some in agony, others in battle frenzy. Blades hitting against the thick executioner's wheel, as well as limbs being cut and pummeled.
They are here! See!
He whispered and pointed out through the embrasures.
The Radiant.
Wait!
The two looked on as the distant crowd remained in place, like ants swarming around. Even from the castle walls, the battle was terrifying to witness. Who was winning could not be determined, as all the little moving specks looked the same. They watched on for a time until his heart began to race, and he nervously looked towards the closed door of the gatehouse.
I should...
He started fumbling with the keychain.
Can't you make sure... make sure no one is coming?
He continued looking through the keys, while the other walked away on the battlements towards the open archway leading into a tower. His nerves got the better of him, and he simply walked over to the door. There, he cast a glance to confirm the Battle of the Ants was still ongoing, which it was. He then started trying out different keys in the door, while occasionally peering back out towards the bridge. Eventually he found one that fit, allowing him into the gatehouse. It was empty. From the windows, he saw how the band of radiant executioners had started moving towards the castle. His companion entered with a maniacal glare.
They are approaching!
He whispered loudly.
I know! Get ready!
The giant turning wheel, linked to the unseen counterweights, was placed in the middle of the floor. He remained by the window, while the others stood twitchingly by the wheel.
How are they far?
Shush!
He could distinguish a radiant golden-clad figure in the front, who shortly disappeared beneath his field of view.
Let's go! Open it!
He leapt to one of the pegs in the turning wheel and started pushing. It was somewhat heavy, and he had to lower his posture to push it effectively. But it gave way, and he started hearing the rumbling sound beneath him and around in the walls. They walked around a few turns to the sound of the gate rising. He did not dare to let go, but eventually he was forced to do so when he heard screams from outside. They both rushed over to the window, where they saw the swarming executioners running into the courtyard, meeting the Knights of Cainhurst. He was about to let out the cheering laughter at the demise of the vile fiends at the hand of their most radiant savior, but was stopped upon hearing a blade piercing a body. His companion was gurgling and choking on blood just for a moment, before his chest erupted with a geyser of blood. He stumbled back, falling down to the floor as his legs could not handle the fear in his body. There stood a man, enwreathed in darkness, holding a bloody blade and a silvery helmet glistening in the darkness, atop a mantle of shadows. Eaforth saw the back of Logarius disappearing over the edge of the massive ascending stone slope leading into the castle. He felt a surging eagerness as he vanished out of his field of view, and for a moment he quickened his pace amidst the myriad of golden conic ardeos. Something caused several of his radiant brethren to fall back, colliding into each other and clumsily tumbled down a few steps. A figure about twice the size of a normal man swung with a giant axe at them, cleaving and tossing the radiant men with its thick might. The emotions he felt were not entirely his own. They came from the cries of those around him, the men that fervently called out and quickened their pace up the steps to fell their foe. It made him immune against fear, and like them, he started running upwards. Before he could reach, 4 radiant warriors had pummeled the giant man to the ground with their wheels, like ants swarming a bee. Through the gate, he entered into the large courtyard, where the towering castle buildings surrounded them, reaching up high towards the night sky. The dark, Vileblood knights could easily be seen surrounded by the blood of their foes as they battled the golden warriors. Their blood arts tarnishing their purity as the blood they spilled danced in accordance to their will to smite back at his peers. One Vileblood sheathed its blade, and upon drawing it, slaughtered gruesomely 3 executioners in a single cut. Another he could only see as it came flying down, having presumably leapt high into the air, with a streak of red lightning smiting into its enemies. Yet another he saw as if dancing among them, slicing freely with the blade that effortlessly severed limbs like they were simply dolls. However, each eventually vanished beneath the roaring host of warriors as their numbers overwhelmed them. Ahead, he saw the tall Logarius swinging his blade, striking away the foul blood blade with a flash of light, then kicking into the chest of the Vileblood knight, screaming out in victorious fury as the blade pierced his chest. He turned and with wild, bulging eyes quickly located another enemy. He looked like he was afraid, completely engulfed by the emotion. But instead of fleeing, he maniacally darted towards a woman wielding a piercing sword, screaming loudly and swinging wildly. Truly like a man that had no governance over his dominating fear, that gave him primal might to cut down at her, severing her arm. His white hair flew widely around, and his body moved like possessed, jerking and irregular. Eaforth started moving along with the others in his direction. Surrounding Master Logarius was the most furious battle, red and black garbs clashing against the vastly overwhelming blue and golden warriors. Yet even if their numbers resembled a tide swallowing up the sandy shore, it was their numbers that fell most frequently. Around the black knights flew blood-like blades, tracing their movements and forcefully massacring the noble warriors. He managed to come within a closer distance to Lugarius, who was moving towards the main gate. His march was slow, as he was never focused on one goal, but constantly shifted his attention to brutally combat any of the Vileblood coming across him. Eoforth, along with many others, passed him and reached the steps leading up to the gate. It suddenly opened, and 3 massive knights, clad in silvery armor to the point they appeared like statues coming to life, emerged, holding shields and massive swords that swept over the golden warriors. In a single sweep, he saw a man be cut in half from his shoulder down to his waist. One of the massive knights let out a guttural grunt as it bashed with the shield, so 4 men were shoved down the steps, tumbling over each other. Eoforth ran ahead. A man in front of him became the target and was pierced by the massive ornate blade, allowing him to sprint past and with the hefty wheel slam into the ankle of the armor. It buckled and the giant leaned over to its side, having to support itself with the shield arm. It made little sound as it suffered, only grunted in a metallic pitch. Another came up and pummeled the wheel down into the helmet, almost causing it to sink into the torso, and the body fell forward on the steps. When Eoforth looked back at the fallen enemy, he saw about 15 blue-robed bodies among the single one, and for a moment he stopped, momentarily gripped by the horrible thoughts, and his eyes drifted to Lugarius, valiantly leading his radiant warriors into battle against evil. An evil that each looked to take a number of 10 men with it into the embrace of a radiant purge. With their wheels, Eoforth and another man took turns bashing against a door until it burst open. They swarmed into a grand dining hall, hollering in fury as 2 Vilebloods came to meet them. One shot his companion in the shoulder, then sliced open the chest of another as he came charging at him. Eoforth reached him and shoved with the broad side of the wheel at him, causing him to fall on his back. Then his chest was broken beneath his swinging wheel.
Seize them! Seize them all!
Lugarius marched into the room, and his men started grabbing the elegantly dressed attendants. Some of them merely jerked up limp bodies, exposing their cut throats and wrists as they already lay dead over the long table. Lugarius examined the self-inflicted departures by raising his eyebrows, as one would when examining a fine painting or work of art. Then he pointed to those still alive.
Like the rest, they are all to be executed for their abhorrent misuse of holy blood.
Eoforth turned to the master, glancing back at the distressed faces. It was then he saw a woman holding tight around a little girl.
How do we know their blood is...
Lugarius' piercing eyes were enough to silence him and were forcefully compelling to the degree he could not look away. He smiled his warm smile, but it twitched, it evidently being difficult to maintain.
My son, this is not a sin you desire spread to your heirs. Our children's well-being is our reward for our actions.
His reassuring tone failed with one glance at the terrified faces of the nobles.
Every last drop of Canaan's blood must be expunged. Out from the veins of men and down into the abyss. Dried forevermore. You understand, son?
He nodded, and Logarius stepped further into the room. Eaforth headed towards the mother still seated, shivering in place with her daughter. The pair were further down the long table, on the other side. In the corner on their side of the table, deep down in the hall, grew a sound that gradually overtook the wails of the fiends as they had the gall to plead for mercy. Heavy, armored boots and rustling of full plate came echoing towards them. Out from the archway came a massive figure with an incredible one-bladed executioner's axe, utilized like a walking staff. The grim character was entirely enveloped by a red mantle and hood, but silver armor glistening underneath. Even the cries of venomous nobles had quieted at his arrival. Everyone turned their heads to Logarius, who nodded for them to engage. They put on their conic helmets, but managed not much of an advance before the mantle flew backwards like by a powerful draft underneath him. A thick red cloud exploded around him, and out from it emerged several agonizing skulls, shattering their jaws maddeningly, and they hovered towards them. Eaforth threw himself to the floor as they suddenly came flying towards them like cannon fire. When he stood back up, he saw one of his peers on the opposite side of the table being cleaved through at the waist by the massive armored figure having leapt out from the smoke. It proceeded to throw its hand back, like preparing to toss something immaterial. As it committed to the toss, one of the red screaming skulls manifested in the hand, and it was thrown towards Logarius. It grew in size as it traveled, and the master was forced to throw himself away. It continued past him and exploded into the wall behind him, leaving a large black stain. As the axe swung around, it created a trail of red smoke, which in turn conjured the red spectral skulls that would seek them out. One of the blue-robed executioners became completely overwhelmed and succumbed screamingly to the skulls as they bitingly seemed to burrow themselves into his body. He was left standing in convulsions in the wake of the skulls before falling dead to the floor. The Canehurst nobles all screamingly flew from their seats and headed towards the door the grim warrior had emerged from. Logarius came to his feet and screamed so his face became red. Be it fear for the enemy or a rational awareness of his odds, Eaforth chose to pursue the fleeing nobles. He left the room while the Radiant threw themselves at a large executioner that cut each down with ease, ultimately clashing with Logarius, who paralleled his stature and with more agile maneuvering, engaged the foe. Eaforth ran down a wide corridor of steps, into a large hall with an open floor. 2 servants seemed to be cowering in the corner that he ignored, seeing how meek and frail they appeared. He continued over the floor to a doorway leading outside, onto a balcony running along the entire exterior of the building. To the right, he saw the fleeing nobles heading towards a tower lying on the very end of the island, joining the outer wall. He took but a few steps after them when he noticed something that made him stop so abruptly he almost stumbled. 4 men were covering the foul nobles, wearing the blue robes, but having forsook their golden ardeos. They let the mother and her daughter run past them into the tower. He ran after them, but once again stopped once his fellows turned to him. Eaforth's eyes were burning with ire, and had done so since he stepped onto the bridge back at Hemwick. But that ire receded once he saw his fellow executioners look back at him. He felt threatened, angry, confused, all sorts of emotion that ultimately boiled down into a plain uncertainty. They looked more firm in their cause than he, and the expression they gave him plainly told that if he were to pursue, he would have to face his brothers. He stood still where he was. The mother, with her child, had stopped and grabbed one of them by the mantle, wordlessly pleading for them to leave. They all looked at him, as well as the blonde girl in her arms. Despite being a child, and to a lesser degree, she shared something in her look with the 4 hardened men. Then they all turned and disappeared down a flight of steps into the tower. Back in the Grand Hall, he was approached by a manic Logarius, drenched in blood and followed by the Golden Warriors.
Well?
His eyes darted around, to him and behind him, unable to remain focused. Nothing.
What?
There's nothing back there. Eaforth had tailed in the back of Logarius' party, no longer hollering and appearing as the incarnation of battle as previously. The castle now felt empty and quiet. The master completely disregarded any of the meek servants. Perhaps he did not even look their way, since they were so dissimilar to the nobles and lacked more or less all the features that could mark them as Vileblood. He noticed in himself that he felt the subtle air of relief each time such individuals were ignored. Had the master wished it, he could easily dispatch them, punish them for their cooperation in this blasphemy. Yet they were beneath him, and he was tired after a long night of slaughter. Perhaps he had thought he would feel invigorated by such a radiant purge, and perhaps he did in the beginning. Now he was unsure what to think, and was thus confined to walk dispirited behind his master, along his fellow warriors who shared his downtrodden demeanor. Not the master, though, who grunted as he walked quickly through the halls. Since entering the castle, he had likely started growing more and more frustrated for each second he did not possess the whereabouts of the vilest of the vile. They emerged outside, atop a roof with a grand walkway leading to one of the tallest wings of the castle, next to the grand, ominous central spire. The wind was blowing to drown out the sounds from below, making him feel like he was somewhere else and losing sight of the previous events. His heart began beating faster when they entered the large wing, into an echoing hall with a wide ascending staircase. They entered into a vacant hall with pillars, exquisitely polished marble floor, mostly illuminated by a tall window on the end wall, and candles placed around 2 thrones, directly in front of the window. Logarius froze, and it seemed like his breath was caught in his throat, having turned into a statue. In the right throne sat a woman, head looking down to the side and hands folded in her lap, wearing a silvery dress with her arms and shoulders bare. In the other sat a terribly disheveled character. His garb was regal, and the crown marked him a king, yet he looked more like a doll, sitting limply in his chair. Logarius took the first steps forward, more calmer and with a straightened, composed posture, like he held true reverence for the vile majesty.
Interloper.
The queen's voice sounded out through the hall, causing him to briefly stop. A soft, barely accusatory voice, but very prominent.
Vain and foolish sycophant, who doth even below in pity. The meek have ever coveted the strength of our majesty.
Logarius started growing furious once more, noticed in how he leaned forward as he walked and breathed more heavily.
Base creatures that can but behold the divine, yet are unable to partake thereof. Such is the curse appointed unto us, ours to bear together. A majesty that shall never know death, ever weeding her subjects.
The body in the second seat twitched. The chest heaved forward as if it was pulled by a string, the head leaning back unnaturally. The hands came to life, the fingers cracking like they had been made of stone, now animated. They grabbed the armrest's end, and the body pulled itself slowly upwards. The king of Cainhurst stood up, slouching forward so it looked like he would tumble forward on his rickety legs, obscured by an intricate black and red robe wrapped in a grand mantle.
Now, be ye purged, my subjects, by the flame of Cainhurst's blood.
The head turned up at them. A head suffering from dried decay, still wearing the regal crown. Having leaned against the throne, the king grabbed the massive sword in his skeletal hand. At his touch, small, unnaturally red flames slowly crept along a blade so blood-stained it appeared to almost have been forged from blood. He took a step towards them, a limping step, but already by the second, the body seemed to recall the movements of life while dragging the sword with him. More and more as he advanced, his posture straightened until he appeared like the regal and terrifying king he was, holding the greatsword with one hand held out to the side. Logarius drew his sword, and the warriors spread out beside him. The king's blade started to burn more and more in a terrible crimson hue, a blasphemous flame. In 2 quick, composed steps, the king had advanced terribly quickly and swung the blade over his head, tracing red fire in the air after the sword. He cut straight into the floor as they all leapt to the side, but he was quick to turn his whole body around and swing again, cleaving down into one of the warriors who died on the spot. When Eaforth leapt in to bash with his wheel, it seemed like the king's body was indeed a statue, for despite its frail appearance, it was not thrown off balance in the slightest. The king did, however, appear somewhat lost after the brutal slaughter, as he had stopped in the motion, slowly straightening himself with a dead expression on his skeleton face. Suddenly he launched into his next move that only missed Eaforth because of the impact with his wheel. It sent him tumbling backwards. Logarius shouted in anger, and he swung his sword into the king's back. The walking corpse held his sword in front of his face, ducked suddenly, and spun around, sweeping the blade at Logarius, who jumped backwards from the red flames. The king was quick to stand back up straight, holding the sword straight out to his side as he advanced. While he did so, the fires upon the blades increased in fury, and upon reaching a seemingly uncontrollable state, he swung from side to side. Logarius darted behind a pillar, but the wide attack caught 2 warriors in its destructive path, completely enveloping one in red fire, while the other managed to retreat back with only his garb set ablaze. Eaforth stood up, realizing that he now only possessed half a wheel. Tossing it aside, he drew his sword and advanced on the turned back of the king. As he cut downward, the king turned around in perfect timing, striking with the sword directly in front of him, so his blade struck its broad side. He continued to spin around, swinging the blade over his head to bring it down at another warrior approaching. He was decapitated frighteningly quickly by the sweep. Eaforth was so stunned that he almost reacted too late by the spinning king coming around to make an attempt on his head as well, but he managed to duck and back away. It was truly like watching a statue fight, as he was eerily upright, moving his limbs like they were independent of each other, yet intricately coordinated with one another. It was like balance, and the weight of the sword was inconsequential to him. 3 men came charging at him simultaneously, which did manage to at least push him, albeit without any noticeable, perturbed reaction, as he simply took a few steps away. As the king turned towards them, Logarius emerged behind them to thrust the sword into the king's chest. It made the body stagger a bit, but it quickly kicked back Logarius, then swept with a burning sword at them. The sword still within the chest. The king grabbed it and pulled it out, with only a broken and disturbed sigh escaping him. The 3 men assaulted the king, but the terrifying foe retaliated by swinging first the small blade, then the larger, which had him enter into a rapid sequence of advancing swings towards the 3 men, that each was beset by the superior speed and strength of the dual-wielding monster. Logarius quickly snatched up a sword from a fallen warrior, while Eoforth attempted to come up behind the king as he paused after the flurry of swings, and cut at his arms holding the master's stolen sword. It severed it, and the king called out in a low grunting scream as he hunched forward, seemingly in pain. While the noise had provoked Eoforth to retreat, Logarius and 2 other warriors took the opportunity of this first sign of weakness. But the king's raging growl increased in volume, and he held up his bloodied blade. A massive conflagration erupted over it, and he let out a shout as he plunged it into the floor, causing an explosion that completely enveloped him and a wave of blasphemous fire to circle out around him. Eoforth was sent falling back by the force, as well as his still standing companions, while the king emerged from the receding inferno, ascending above it completely enveloped in the red flames, like they were carrying him aloft. He then descended like a falling star, with a wide sweep of the sword that now tossed the flames around like it was blood. The room started to burn more and more by the spilling fire, like burning oil. Red flames and smoke spew from behind the king as he flew towards Logarius. He dodged to the side and managed to strike the king in the side. He was quickly forced to run for cover as he cut with the blade after him, sending forth flames that Logarius had to shield himself from behind a pillar. Eoforth found it incredibly difficult to find an opening to attack, as the floor was littered with burning puddles. One of the warriors turned from behind a pillar and pierced the king's side, lodging the sword within. He turned and with the stump of his severed hand, thrusted it forward into the warrior. He was lifted up into the air, while fire seemed to devour him from within. He screamed until it was fire that spewed from his mouth, eventually completely erupting in a conflagration that disintegrated his body. Both Logarius and Eoforth rushed at him and struck with their blades in his back. He stumbled forward a bit and grunted, and once he turned, Eoforth grabbed a broken piece of a wheel and slammed it up into the king's face. He stumbled to the side, sweeping clumsily with his sword that hit Eoforth with a blunt side, shoving him to the floor. He felt the fire burn at him, not like a normal fire, but like one that was alive and hungry for his flesh. When he turned around, he saw how Logarius had managed to grab around the king's collar with both hands, and with the king's already stumbling momentum, managed to throw them both to the floor. The burning blade was dropped. The king grabbed around Lugarius' face where they lay on the floor, and the master started screaming. Eaforth quickly grabbed the hefty blade and struggled to swing it over his head. It was more so the incredible weight, rather than his own strength, that saw the blade plummeting straight down into the king's chest, piercing him to the floor. The emaciated mouth opened up wide and screamed until there were no capacity left to do so, and the body was slowly turned to ash by creeping red embers eating away at it, leaving only a sword lodged in the floor. His knees gave out and he fell to the floor, supported by his arms. Lugarius breathed like he had been smothered and coughed while standing up, taking hold of a sword. He saw the queen smirk as the master slowly approached her. It was as if it cast a spell upon Lugarius, for he seemed to grow in stature, his breath trembling with that seething anger. Even with the knowledge of being a blasphemous witch, when he walked onto the steps leading up to the throne, there was a tug of disobedience. The majesty of Cainhurst still held its firm power over the minds of men, it seemed. He slapped her across the face with his open palm. The echoing sound made Eaforth shiver. Then he swiftly drew his blade, grabbed her around the jaw and pulled her closer, slitting her throat in a furious groan. He now heaved like a madman, while she remained composed and still. However, her body never slumped like the dead. Her delicate, pale hands wrapped around the arm, holding her face, and forcefully pulled him closer. The master emitted a furious yell, guttural and fiendish, as her hands reached around his head. His entire body struggled, and his hands dropped the sword to try and push away against the throne. However, he remained locked in place by exquisite royal hands, while blood poured from her open neck. A smile painted her face as she shoved him so close, his face became smeared into the wound. Then she let go, and the tall man flew backwards, stumbling down onto the rug. He rushed over to help him up, but was waved away. Lugarius' face was stained red, and he spat out some of her blood, trembling with ire, still thrown to the floor.
Imbecile.
The queen's voice remained still and composed, but echoed like a roar through the hall. Her dress now stained red, but a dark slit in her throat magically vanished.
The majesty doth not die.
He heaved and snorted in anger, wiping away the blood. Then he let out a loud, primal scream, looking straight at the queen atop her throne, who only leaned back while resting her face against her hand. Not fazed by the accursed scream of the venerable master, her eyes peering down at him with dreadful scorn. Eaforth ran down the tower and out into the courtyard, where he almost fell to the ground, stumbling over the body of an executioner on the ground. It caused him to scream, and the sight alone almost sent him to the ground in shock. He looked out over the ground where the bodies had begun to be covered by a gentle snowfall. Patches of blood covered the ground in the shape of pools and streaks. His breath quivered, not from the cold that manifested his breath before him, but how only then the sight struck him as abominable. The master, a martyr to be sure, confined himself to worship over a vile queen. Yet the image of him seated upon the throne outside of the obscured chamber, cursed to forever sit watch as the snow blew over him, was an image too terrifying to recall. Only then had the hateful madness of Master Logarius struck him. A madness that led to a massacre that he had executed. No doubt that the deranged man was perfectly content upon his throne, with a spreading corruption coursing through his body. Content that the last Vileblood would never see the light of day or revel in the wonderful darkness of mysterious nights. Looking upon the scene of carnage, he cursed Martyr Logarius. Whatever noble reason can remain noble if stained with blood? Whatever intentions lay behind the actions of the Vileblood? Looking out over noble and church guards alike, felt like their good intentions had most definitely been foolish. And he had been one of Logarius' fools, one of his executioners. He continued to run and meet with another group as he came out further. The rest of their band, likely the last, and all with faces of the same terror. However, their speed did not seem likewise spurred by horrible disgust, but genuine desire for survival.
Eaforth, we must leave now. He has been picking us off to the last, like a bloody crow.
A scream came from beyond the main gate the men had emerged from. They all stared back for just a moment to see a body fall sideways out from behind the slightly open gate. The golden Ardeo helmet separated from the body as it hit the ground, and everyone turned immediately to run, almost shoving him down as they did. While Eaforth ran in the front, he turned to look over his shoulder. There came a man calmly emerging from the gate, wearing a black coat. His visage, a spectre of death with a large feathered cape. His head obscured by the dreadful Vileblood's silver helmet. Like a crow, taking flight, he leapt after them and cut one of them in the back with a common Vileblood sword. He withdrew his blade from the fallen man, and the others were forced to defend themselves. His might was like nothing else, and he cleaved straight through their wheels. Eaforth watched in horror how his friends and companions were each cut down by a dark demon. One struck down with a wheel, but missed and had his chest pierced with a blade. It later exploded entirely in an eruption of blood. The bloody crow turned the gained bounty of blood towards the others and cut one of them straight in half as he advanced through them all. When 5 out of the 9 men that had emerged from the castle had all been brutally slain, Eoforth fully embraced cowardice and simply ran towards the courtyard exit. Under his heaving breath, he heard the last screams of his company as they met their unthinkably brutal demise. He crossed the gate and tripped on the steps, falling down the massive stair. When he regained himself, he looked up with horror to observe the man appear at the top, bloody blade in hand and a feathered cape blowing in the wind. He simply threw himself down the rest of the steps and onto the bridge, never looking back the entire way.
Canehurst armor. Silver armor worn by the royal guards who protect Annalise, Queen of the Vilebloods at Canehurst Castle. The paper-thin silver armor is said to deflect blood of ill intent, and is what allows the royal guards to capture prey for their beloved queen, so that one day she may bear a child of blood.